Welcome, Maura Finkelstein. Thank you for joining me on the Radical Futures podcast. I
Thank
am
you.
thrilled to have a fellow American academic so we can take the hammer to the depravity of universities these days, especially in the US and academia broadly. And of course, especially as it pertains to the questions of Palestine or the Palestine exception, as they say. So, Maura, you're a scholar and a writer working in the field of anthropology with an expertise in urban space, labor, and you have done ethnographic work in India. And your book is about a city I know well, where I grew up, Mumbai, and has a beautiful title: The
Thank you.
Archive of Loss, Lively Ruination in Millland, Mumbai. Very cool. So, you were a tenured associate professor of anthropology at Muhlenberg College in Pennsylvania, but you were fired 1 year ago in May 2024 because of your pro-Palestinian and anti-Zionist stance, and because you were so vocal about it. You were one of the first tenured academics to lose their jobs since Israel's genocidal war against Palestinians that started in October 2023. We could push that timeline back if we wanted. But essentially, your firing was one of the first, but I would also add that it's a badge of honor, Thank you for taking the hit, right? This is atrocious stuff going on. So it's been a year, but various processes, appeals, deliberations were ongoing for months after that. And as of now, you're no longer teaching at Muhlenberg. And I am sorry to dig up the wounds, but I think the conversation is more urgent than ever. Suspensions, sanctions, firings continue, and even worse, we have now seen a spate of kidnappings by ICE of graduate students and scholars. So let me dive in. I wanted to ask you a bit more about your work in teaching before the incidents that led up to the termination of your job. Had you always been writing and teaching about Palestine before the events of October 7th?
Yeah, thanks so much for this question and for having me. It's a real honor to be here and be in conversation with you. Um, so I grew up in a Jewish community that is a Zionist community in the Washington, D.C. area, and I never bought into Zionism and I never felt any connection to Israel, but I didn't really have any substantial information or knowledge about the region until I was in high school. And I actually, we're teachers, we're lifelong learners. I had a teacher who changed my life. He put me in a position as a 16-year-old where I had to learn about Palestine. And that was an incredible gift. We're often accused of those of us on the left are accused of indoctrinating our students. And it's
Mm,
actually so much easier and simpler than that. We just give them the material that they need to free themselves. They often do it themselves. They, read primary sources. They, are in conversation. And that's basically what happened for me. I was given this opportunity to start reading Palestinian
mhm.
writers and thinkers. It was pre-internet, so it was a little bit of a challenge, but I found Edward Said's The Question of Palestine at a used
Yeah.
book fair. And so beginning in 1996, I've been trying to learn about Palestine and read Palestinian writers. And that has, we could talk more about that, but that's, I was at Columbia as a master's student in the early
Mhm.
2000s when
Oh,
um, some Zionist organizations that have now been absorbed into Hillel International and also Canary Mission were attacking Joseph Mossad. And
yeah.
that's when I first, so this is 2004, when I first saw what repression, Zionist repression of Palestine looks like on campus. And that sort of followed me for the next, you know,
Mm,
not quite decade until I started teaching and realized that, and we'll talk about this at the time, like 2010 to 2015 and on, I really thought that my position as a Jewish scholar not only protected me, unlike what I saw with people like
mm,
Joseph Mossad or then Steve Salaita, but it also felt like an obligation that I had, a moral obligation to incorporate material on Palestine, even though I was not a scholar of Palestine. I'm an anthropologist, and when I teach
yeah.
topical courses like, migration or urban anthropology or whatnot, I draw from a lot of different parts of the world. I
Mhm.
don't, I was trained as a South Asianist. I did my research in Bombay, but I don't just teach from that space. And so Palestine was always present. And when I got hired at Muhlenberg College, I didn't quite realize until I got there how powerful Hillel International was and how Zionist the campus was.
Wow.
Um, so I was teaching about Palestine, and it was actually because of the climate of the campus that I started teaching a topical course on Palestine that I called very cleverly the anthropology of Palestine. And Hillel International had a sort of informal boycott of my classes. I heard from a lot of closeted anti-Zionist Jewish
Mm.
students that they wanted to take my classes, but they also couldn't afford to lose the community that they had at Hillel. So they would often come to me for resources, but it was like very hush hush, like don't tell anyone that we're seeing Dr. Finkelstein. Um, and there were faculty that tried to, I brought a Palestinian anthropologist to talk on campus, I think in 2017. Hillel and some Zionist faculty tried to get it canceled. There were these moves on
Yeah.
campus, but nothing from the administration. The administration approved my class. They gave me a travel fellowship to go to Palestine one summer.
Mm.
And so, I was teaching about Palestine. I started writing about Palestine, and there was no real institutional backlash
Yeah.
at all until October 7th, 2023. And as we've
Wow.
seen, everything
Hmm.
changed.
Yeah, yeah. So, how come Muhlenberg College is such a is a space like this? Why do you think there's that kind of formation there?
Yeah, I think Muhlenberg is a really good example of, on a very, very small scale, how some of the larger, how Zionism and its larger forms are operating on college and university campuses. So, I can't say for with any certainty how the institution over the past few
Hmm.
decades has been actually thinking about recruitment. But what is true is that the college is, I think, 33% Jewish, which makes it in the top four percentage wise in terms of
Wow.
Jewish student population. So I think Brandeis, Yeshiva, maybe Emory and Muhlenberg are, I think, in the top four. And what that looks like in practice is that the Muhlenberg chapter of Hillel International, which is a Zionist organization that explicitly has ties with Israel and the Israeli Defense Department, and we can talk more about that if you want. But Hillel is one of the most powerful entities on campus.
Yeah.
It's the biggest recruiter for students.
Yeah.
Come to Muhlenberg. This is a great place to be Jewish. And
Wow.
it
I
also
see.
is one of the largest, Hillel International is one of the largest donors to the
Hmm.
college. And so
Yeah.
then you have other Zionist organizations
Yeah.
that are also donating to the college. And then the chair of the board of trustees of Muhlenberg is a Zionist. His wife is Israeli. And so there are these
Yeah.
powerful entities that through financial support of the college has both drawn in students and
Mm.
also because we have this model, this neoliberal model of patronage in our
Absolutely.
colleges and universities, whoever is funding our institutions has,
Yeah. Yeah.
as a large stake and a large say in how these institutions work.
Yeah, absolutely. And this thing you're saying of these networks that are spread so far and wide, I know that after October 7th, some of my colleagues at UConn received, these notes saying, do X or Y, or take your name off of this list, or in the future, I will not have my daughter or son join your university. And and this sounds crazy. It's like, so nobody from your family actually goes here. I don't understand what you're saying. But of course the provosts and the deans immediately pick on that email and try to push for something. And also all these emails as well. We've heard that you're not taking a stance against what became a hoax, the mass rape thing, in gender studies and things like that. And we will be joining the army in the next year, and we will do this, and we will spread this. So, yeah, it's interesting. I think you've synthesized actually some of that diffuse sense of it that I have. I think it's much more Orwellian and more much more strategic and planned than I thought. Um, were you Did you become more activated and more engaged after October 7th?
I would say that before Al-Aqsa flood, before October 7th, 2023, Palestine was something that, in addition to a lot of other, global crises
Yeah,
and national crises, were sort of, it was like top on my radar of things that I was reading about, that I was thinking about, writing about, teaching about. Um, my partner jokes that after October 7th, Palestine became my entire personality. Um, and especially after I was placed on leave and then fired. I mean, I had a lot more time, and that was very true. But I think that I was in the position, as a lot of us were,
hmm,
where I didn't come to consciousness around the genocide in
hmm,
Palestine, the Nakba, the siege on Gaza, the blockade on Gaza on October 7th or October 8th. Like,
sure,
it's something that I had been learning and thinking about for most of my life. But the scale at which we were seeing and continue to see 20
absolutely,
plus months in, the amount of, I actually am getting to the point where I don't even know what words I can use to describe
absolutely,
the horror that we are seeing. And you know, I think the first few weeks of the genocide, I think that there were those of us who had our eye on Palestine and understood the context in which Gaza was, you know, under siege and under occupation, where we were sort of screaming at the top of our lungs about, like, this is a genocide, this is a genocide, this is a genocide. And for me, as a person in the world, I couldn't imagine anything more important than that kind of attention. And I think what was
hmm,
also really eerie and scary is the otherwise silence that those of us who
I know,
have been speaking about this were seeing from our colleagues. So I was seeing that on campus. So, just to, I think there were a lot of us who were doing everything that we could, even from the very beginning. And I was trying very, very hard to figure out, how can I speak about this in public in a particular way? How can I
hmm,
teach about this in my classes in a particular way? And how can I write about this in a particular way? And those three things took a different perspective and a different tone. Like, I talk to my
yeah,
students differently than I, write or post on social media. Um, but within the first week, I think it was October 12th, I had sort of dedicated space in my classes for students, because we had already, in all of my classes, we had already learned about Palestine. We'd read about Palestine. I sort of dedicated space in my classes for students to ask questions about
hmm,
what was happening. And that, and there was a Zionist student who I think now, since graduation, has moved to Israel and joined the Israeli military.
wow, great
That
timing.
student, great timing. That student was in both of my classes and filed a complaint based on
I
those
see.
class periods. And I also responded to the completely monstrous email sent by our college president,
Yeah,
condemning October 7th, saying now is not the time to think about history. Now is just the time to mourn Israel. And so I responded to that on our everything list. And I think those two things, the
hmm,
student complaint and the administration, somehow that email got out. A month later,
yeah,
there was a petition to have me fired. So I think, from very early on, I was like, I don't think I'm going to get fired for thinking a
of course,
genocide is bad, but I will use absolutely every platform and space that I
yeah,
have to speak about this. And by the
hmm,
time I was placed on leave, it's really interesting, because I was chair of my department. I was teaching a 3-3. I was commuting to my job. And now all of a sudden, I was under investigation. And really, the main thing I had time to be studying, reading, learning, thinking, and writing about
Yeah.
Gaza. And that's sort of what I it
Yeah.
became, and it's been an incredible education, because I think of the things that I was writing and saying in the fall of 2023 versus now. I've learned a lot. And I think a lot of us who are scholars and writers in academia, where the stakes are actually quite low, we can
Yeah.
take as much time as we need, aside from tenure and promotion, et cetera, to get our ideas
Yes.
where we want them and get them published. And I think for those of us who have been like speaking and writing in real time, I've changed my mind a lot over the past
Hmm.
2 years. And that's been a real gift, to be in a position in which, it is a horrific situation. I mean, there's nothing good that's come of this, but I've had the great benefit of
Hmm.
learning from Palestinians, both in Gaza, in the occupied West Bank, and in the diaspora, who are teaching me how to think about
Yeah.
what is happening.
Hmm.
And that's been, just to sort of wrap up this answer, that's been the primary thing that I've been doing over the past, I would say, year and a half, almost 2 years
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. 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 No, there's a lot there to unpack. So many things that you're talking about. Um, First of all, you're making being fired very alluring. We don't recommend it. Nice. It's like, learning, so how nice, getting to change your mind and changing it back. But I think that's important, that you don't say uh, anything other than that, honestly, because I am so sick of people holding on to their jobs as if that's all they've ever had. Like, if they don't have the humanity or the morality to understand that they're holding, that the self censorship, that's embedded in all this thinking about Palestine, and that people are like, I can't say anything because of this, I can't teach this, not going to put this on the syllabus, all of these things. It's just the depravity of that, the immorality, the lack of ethics of that, as a teacher, as a human, is so super problematic. And what is it, when a whole population is erased, what you're going to be left with? What, I had my little job, because academics have immense power at the end of the day. I mean, I always thought, like, at some point I was like counting, like, I taught at CUNY for many years, I taught at UConn for many years. It's like, how many people per year, say if it's like 50 to 100 people that go through you, that you have the capacity to influence. And I would say, like, I could confidently say that I converted 3 or 4 to something,
Yeah.
to some sort of interesting way of thinking, or made them minor in a subject that they didn't plan on, things like that. And I think that's immense success over the years, and I think you can't shy away from that responsibility. So my point being, I'm glad you're trying to make it look good, because hey, there is life after this, and you'll find jobs, other jobs, you'll become a better thinker, a better scholar. I mean, there is no need to give up your entire morality for what is going on, because it's not normal at all,
Yeah.
um, and in these classes, as you were saying, you made Palestine sort of central to all that. And of course, what we have now is evidence of just the sheer amount of surveillance on you, the sheer amount of tracking everything you were doing. And it seemed like you had a target on your head from way before October 7th anyway, and that just got further activated and pushed to its limits. But I want to also ask you, were you feeling the impact of some of this on some others? Like, of course, there were the horrid ones and they've cost you your job. But then what about, do you feel you also managed to change course for a few? Did you have the satisfaction of feeling that?
You mean as in teaching about Palestine?
Yeah, at
Yeah, I
this
mean, I think,
time, in that
yeah, I
in that
think,
year when bad stuff was going on, was there
mhm.
also a student that had changed course because of this, was really grateful to you, things like that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, that's the work, right? I think
Yeah.
that learning is very uncomfortable. It's supposed to be uncomfortable. I think this weaponization of student safety, aside from being so disingenuous, really erases the fact that learning is uncomfortable. It shouldn't feel good to have your entire worldview that you inherited, that was like placed upon you, cracked open so that you can use the materials you have in order to rethink the world differently, and think about the future in a radical kind of way, right? Like
Hmm.
this is the work. And I actually hadn't ever had in my classes up until October 2023 any pushback over
Mm.
what I taught about Palestine, aside from one Zionist student I had early on when in an introduction to anthropology class, um, who just like refused to do the readings, and refused to acknowledge Palestinians and as human beings. And I
Why
don't know
were
what
they in
happened
the
to that student.
class?
Just
Oh, they
it
had
was a
to take.
general requirement, yeah. And
Oh, okay.
I would manage, I in my intro class I would teach a lot of different
Sure.
perspective, or not a perspective, but a lot of different like case studies to
Yeah.
activate the questions of anthropology. And so that I made sure I was always teaching at least 1 week, unless in which we were reading about Palestine, usually by Palestinian anthropologists.
Hmm.
And I think I can think like of that one student who made it very clear that they had no interest in engaging the material. But I would say otherwise, over 12 years of teaching, I knew what I was doing in the classroom. I wasn't going in and creating
Yeah.
an environment in which students felt defensive and scared. That's not a productive way to think about the classroom.
No.
So it wasn't until October 2023 that I had any pushback about the material that I was teaching, um, in terms of Palestine. And I think for me, some of the most important work I've done as a teacher is just sort of model, and I think a lot of us are doing this, just model for our students alternate ways of being in the world. And I did hear from a handful of my students in the fall of 2023 that I was the only professor they had who was even acknowledging what was happening, let alone like thinking
Hmm.
about Palestine as the central question. And they were grateful for that, not because I was like dazzling them with, my
Sure.
extensive knowledge of whatever, but just that, I
Have a
was making a
space.
space where we could have, yeah, have these conversations and think differently about the propaganda that if you're in the United States, we are an incredibly Zionist country, just like we're a white supremacist, capitalist, heteronormative, all of
Whatever.
the violent ideologies, they're all here. We've got them
Yeah.
all. And just, helping my students think beyond that violent, dehumanizing frame.
Wonderful.
Um, yeah, I think that
That
makes the job worth it when the jobs
absolutely.
are had. Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to ask you about what I keep calling carceral logic or carceral academia, um, because it starts with like one email, one complaint, one this, one that, and of course, what you're saying about this student resisting reading this like stuff about Palestine in an mandatory intro class. That's that's one. And I know I have had colleagues who have taught Orientalism by Edward Said, which is not even about Palestine. It doesn't center Palestine, certainly,
Mm-mm.
but a student. A student said they felt very unsafe, and this is, I'm talking about like 5 years ago, 6 years ago.
Mhm.
So it's like this stuff is just constantly, it's just been in the air, and of course your case resembles very much Stephen Saleta, which was also about surveilling his social media, and in your case also became about surveilling social media. And there was something very funny that you said, where you said you wish you had been fired for something you yourself had written. not a repost of Remy Kanazi, the Palestinian poet and writer. But I
Who is
just wanted to talk.
wonderful, and I respect him greatly. I just wish that I had been fired
I
for
love
like what I've
Remy.
read.
I was with him in Palestine. I was with him in West Bank for the Palestine Literature Festival. He's fabulous. He's amazing. So you chose a good one, and he's
Yeah.
also like on the nose. So that's what it is, really. But carceral logic, spying, and now this has become normal because now we have straight up ICE picking people off the streets outside their homes from the streets and so on. So surveillance is like the absolute norm, and violent methods of surveillance is the absolute norm. Imprisonment, incarceration has become the norm. But I think what I'm trying to get at is that it's always been part of a structure of American universities, because those are the only ones I really know. And uh, faculty are involved, listserv become traps, alumni networks go in. Of course, there's the Hillel WhatsApp groups in your case, which I found to be just awful, where they're just a whole WhatsApp group about you, just like, here's what she's doing now, here's what she's doing then. And a lot of times, these digital things feel not so harmful, but then eventually they are inscribed upon the body, like where we're talking about Mahmoud Khalil, or whether we're talking about the fact that you materially have lost your job. They become very, very real. And I just wanted to ask you, like, had you been thinking about, what do you think about this idea that American universities are just constantly adhering to this logics of carcerality, surveillance? I think, people like Fred Moten have spoken about this. There has been some writing about this, but I'm just thinking about it a lot more, and I wondered if you are in
Yeah.
some.
Yeah. I think I think about this obsessively, actually. And as it turned out, my partner last semester was teaching a class on surveillance. So it went from
Wow.
being like, this is always sort of something that we're thinking about, to being like, oh my God, now like I'm like reading along. And this is really terrifying. But I think, we've set up, you know, to sort of continue the points that you were making in the question that you asked. I think there's all of these ways in which we're constantly not just subjected to these forms of carcerality and surveillance, but we also normalize them and naturalize them to the point in which
Exactly.
we can't even, see them anymore. So even over the last, few years, um, our like college issued laptops were sort of, if they had just been issued, that they would have this sort of surveillance technology that's Israeli developed put on to them as a sort of like cloud device. Some of my colleagues had to bring their computers on to have this surveillance. We had, over the past year, emails disappear off the listserv
Oh my
because
gosh.
they said something about Palestine. We also have these mechanisms of these like online, whether it be Blackboard or Canvas or whatever, in which our students are subjected to all of this surveillance, what they can write and what they can say and all of this stuff. And these things have been so, normalized and naturalized that I think we don't understand the extent to which we're under surveillance. Like, I ensured that, my phone was never on Muhlenberg Wi-Fi. When I was put on leave, I went to Costco and I like, bought a new laptop so that I wouldn't be connected to the school in any of these ways. I think that the way that we've sort of naturalized this surveillance is so
Hmm.
extensive that I wasn't even aware of it. I mean, even on like a small scale, until I was placed under investigation, I actually, because I'm 45 and not entirely tech savvy, didn't realize I could see who was viewing my stories. And then I went and saw that it was like all of the
Maura,
college
no.
administrators. No, 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 I know. And went in and like blocked all of the,
Sure.
Hillel staff, Hillel students, and like my college university or college president, provost, and dean, who had been like watching everything. So I think these different levels of security, I think, or surveillance, are so prevalent that we've just sort of normalized and naturalized them. But I also think, we exist in this, the United States is such a capitalist, individualist
I
world that
know.
we've built and that we live in. We can't think collectively in any kind of
Yeah.
large and comprehensive kind of way. And so I think that this is slightly changing now, but at least the first year when I was placed on leave and some other faculty around the country were also investigated and placed on leave, it was formed into such like an individual problem, like this person did this thing, that
Mm.
our larger communities could not see the way in which, like, I don't know how you could see the genocide in Gaza and not see
I
it
know.
as a genocide. But even folks who weren't thinking or did not care or were just like racist, Islamophobic Zionists who like were fine with genocide, the fact that they couldn't see the way that what was happening to us as individuals also had, there were collective implications. And we're seeing that now, right? Like it's all sort of playing out on this large scale where
Yeah.
I think this sort of like individual, bad actors, like I've been accused of bias and, making Jewish students feel unsafe and all of these things that sort of detract from the fact that we are here for an education and we have a responsibility to learn about the world and think critically about the world. And if our colleagues, our students are all like brought into the project of ensuring that, certain
Yeah.
senses of comfort and safety that are like, emotional and not physical, are at the center of what we're doing. I've actually been surprised how many people are willing to jump on board with the
Hmm.
whole we need to be sanctioning the people who are making our
I know.
students feel uncomfortable, because we don't want to create this environment of unsafety, without realizing that actually in addition to basically being genocide denial,
Absolutely.
or like drawing on genocide denial, it's also undermining the entire um, fabric of what education is supposed to be. So to like trying to just like think out loud and answer your question, I think, we've so normalized this sort of like targeting individuals within these institutions that there's no sense of how we're all implicated in the
Yeah.
fear. I mean, I talk to colleagues all the time who are just scared every day they go into the classroom. And my attitude is, why would you want to work under those conditions? Where is the
Hmm.
general strike? Where, like, even if you're not, if even if the hill that you're not willing to die on is genocide, anything you teach is probably implicated here. So resist this carcerality, resist this surveillance, and think collectively. But that's a very
Absolutely.
un-American thing to do.
I know, I know. The collectivity is always an issue. It's always also my individual kind of safety, and
Yeah.
what will happen if I do something. It's like it's an I-centric approach at the end, which is funny for a country that is so obsessed with the value of like family and stuff like that, because at the end of the day that is meant to engage a collective ethos, things like that. um about this kind of of course we have to talk about academic freedom and its limits, right? Like and I'm sure you didn't live in the world, or I didn't live in a world where we thought, oh, academic freedom is just limitless. You walk into a class and say whatever or whenever. Of course not, right? But ideologically it's always made to seem that it is the left progressive or liberal progressive who are canceling the right wingers, right? And it's always made to seem that, and of course, in my echo chamber, in my informational reality, I don't think so. But there is a lot of like canceling of academics who are, I don't know, right wing or something like that, or anti-queer and things like that. And I just wonder. And you were cancelled for precisely the views that I adhere to, that I care about. But what do we make of like the shape of cancel culture and academic freedom within that? Is it is there two sides to the story kind of thing? Because I just hate two sides. But you know I do wonder
Yeah.
at some level.
Yeah, so the way I feel about this, so, I let me see if I can answer this question with a divergence, which is
Yeah.
usually what I do. So, I started teaching in the midst of the earlier iterations of trigger warnings and the backlash of trigger warnings and folks on the right calling our students snowflakes because they wanted to like have some understanding of how they were going to be implicated by the materials that they encountered in class, which we could talk about
Hmm.
as a side bar, but was very much about the ways that certain faculty, usually white men and some white women, would essentially dehumanize their students, especially their students of color, also queer students, and students that identified as women, or students that had experienced sexual violence.
Hmm.
So much of this, like when I started teaching in 2012, was about whether students have the right to be sort of aware of potential damage that could come from the material that they were encountering in class. And it was difficult because, of course, like people have different ways of engaging that. But when I started teaching, I would always go into my classrooms because I would never give trigger warnings. I would say everything I teach is going to be triggering to someone because I teach about colonialism and imperialism and structural violence and enslavement and dispossession, all of these things, you know um, the
Yeah.
violence, the structural violence of poverty. These are all things that are probably really hard for people to learn. But my
Hmm.
rule is that nothing I do or say or teach in the classroom can be dehumanizing. Nothing I do or say can deny anyone in this class their humanity. And that is also the ground rule for students. You are not allowed to say or do anything in my class that denies the humanity of others. After that ground rule, and I know humanity and the human is like I read Sylvia Winter, but like for the context of my
Yeah.
classes with undergrads, that was sort of how I would present it. But we're not allowed to deny the humanity of anyone else. Otherwise, we're here to ask hard questions, engage difficult material. If I violate that rule, you have to call me out. If you violate that rule, somebody will probably call you out. We're accountable to each other. That was sort of the ground rule of my classes. And the thing that I am finding so infuriating, so I've often been written about in which I'm compared to Amy Wax at University of Pennsylvania, which is a pretty infuriating comparison. And the New York Times article did that as well. Because what
Hmm.
Amy Wax does, because she still has her job, is that she goes into classrooms and feels like that is a space in which she can actually deny the humanity of some of her students.
Mm.
Students who are femme, students who are black. I mean, she says things all the time in which she's denying the humanity of her students, of other people. And I think, these far right, white nationalist, Zionist transphobes who,
Yeah.
want to destroy anything that has brought us any sort of equity, when they are getting canceled, which, doesn't happen that often. Amy Wax still has her job. It is because they're denying the humanity of other people. They're denying that some people are able, have access to some kind of like equal status as
Hmm.
human. Again, this is a fraught landscape, but it seems like that can be the
Yeah.
sort of the bare minimum. For those of us who are losing our jobs, who are being suspended, who are under investigation, who are being disappeared by ICE, we're basically doing the opposite. We're saying there's a genocide happening. It has been happening for 77 years. And that actually is only possible because large groups of people are constantly being denied their humanity because of settler colonialism, which is a genocidal
Yeah.
process and structure. And so it's actually the opposite. So I'm very wary of anyone who says this is all about free speech, this is all about academic freedom, whether you're on the left or whether you're on the right. We just need to, I heard Naomi Klein say something about that, like, oh, we shouldn't have been so eager to cancel folks on the right because now maybe we're seeing it happen on the left. I think that this is something we hear a
Yeah. This
lot, and actually
equating.
Yeah, and they don't exist in the same space. So one of the things that I get attacked over, in addition to speaking out about the genocide and drawing attention to the fact that in order to have a genocide, you have to dehumanize an entire population. And we've, in the United States, been excellent over the past few years of dehumanizing Palestinians, Muslims, Arabs, you know,
Sure.
people in Iran. I mean, we're seeing like
Oh,
decades of dehumanization and sort of vilification of Iran like come to fruition. It's really terrifying. Um, what I've also been accused of is that criticizing Zionism, which is a genocidal Jewish supremacist ideology. It's not it becomes a political identity, but it's not like an inherent part of who people are. But that my criticism of Zionism and my criticism of the state of Israel, both of which it's my obligation as a human to criticize those
mhm.
violent structures and violent states and violent ideologies, that's dehumanizing to students who identify as Zionist, and that's disingenuous.
Yeah.
And it distracts
Good.
from the fact that what we are actually talking about is a genocide.
Yeah. No, no, no. That's a good answer. That's a good way for me to think about it too. Because sometimes I find myself stumped actually a little bit in the Naomi Kleinian type of individuated thinking. Everybody must have X freedom and so on. No, that's absolutely that's great. Thank you. Um, you know, I mean, I think I'm getting the sense, and I've always been very critical of academia while being in it.
Mhm.
Have always come up against administrative structures and things like that. But and it feels like you've also experienced some of that. I know you were at Columbia, and for your masters, and even later on when you were at Muhlenberg College, you've seen some of this, some of the way in which academia works, like the logic of the administrators, the way faculty function. But it's like, I'm never content with what we see out there as a critique of academics and academia and the industry of knowledge production, whatever it is we might be called. And it's now, of course, become like a shocking levels of complicity and so on. And so now we have to really rethink this tired notion, like it's a neoliberal university, and that's it, it's a neoliberal university. And it's like, yes, of course, that's a huge issue. But I guess I'm throwing it on you to tell me, what do you think is wrong with uh, academia fundamentally, or with academics, like singular academics as well? Like one of the the problems I have, of course, is like academics, like, and their ownership, say, over certain terms or something. Like they will have these I do a series called Decolonize That, which is with a lefty press in New York, and these are non-academic books. They're written by academics who are smart and knowledgeable and so on. But it's like, oh, you can't use the word decolonization in that way, you can't say decolonize, you can't say this, you can't say that. And it's like, who decided? Like, what even is this fight about? So being hung up in those ways about certain things, that's also a huge problem for me. So I don't know, so I'm just going to throw it out there for you. What do you think is what's wrong? What's wrong with this profession? And we can stick to the American version of it, because I know that it's wrong to bring the whole planet on onto it.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure I could speculate, and I've talked to a lot of academics in Australia and the UK and Europe, and I've spent enough time in India to sort of have a sense of how Indian institutions work. But because I've only been enrolled and taught at American US institutions, I'll like stick to that. But there's the like generous answer that I have that I'll start with, and then there's the ungenerous version that I actually think is more important. And I think, oh, sorry, I think that the generous uh, thing that I have to say is that most college and university workers are not tenured professors at Columbia or NYU or Stanford or wherever. And they don't have a lot of protections. They don't make a lot of money. I think one of the problems with academia is that we don't see ourselves as workers. And so so many of the academics that I know are actually working very overwhelming, low paying jobs in which, as the economy spins out of control, these are also folks who are
Yeah.
struggling to support their family. They're struggling to deal with, increasing medical crises and health insurance and raising rents. And, I'm a vegan, but apparently eggs are unaffordable and, all of these things. And I think because it is so scary and sort of unimaginable to lose one's job in a horrific economy. I think a lot of people are just being frozen in place and frozen into silence by their own precarity that they may or may not have realized before the sort of overt crumbling of higher ed that's been going on for a very long time. And so I think a lot of people are just very, 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 very scared, and they don't want to do or say anything that is going to cost them their job because most folks, and I was one of
Sure.
these, like I was really making it month to month. It was very, very hard for me to save money. I
Sure.
managed to do it, but I wasn't making a lot of money, and I was like pulling myself also out of debt. um that's the sort of, I think that's what's really like this very like close individual family focused, how do I just need to get through this week, this month, whatever. But I think the ungenerous infuriated part of me is what the, can I swear on this show, like what the fuck are our jobs if we can't actually, first of all,
I know.
hold on to and be committed to the theoretical and ethical claims that we make in our work. Like, I think everyone who has ever written anything or taught anything that had the word liberation or decolonization or whatever, like everyone who's done that and hasn't said anything about Gaza, like none of your work matters. It doesn't mean anything. You wrote an academic press book that like 100 people read and it got you tenure, but it doesn't mean anything if you haven't said anything over the past 20 months. That
Hmm.
like it's completely useless. And also I think the silence within academia has been part of the reason that academia has been so easily dismantled over the past few years. If we do not see this as a collective move to save the last scraps of what could be imagined as something good in American higher ed, like none of it is worth saving, protecting. Like let it all burn, let it all crumble. Once it's been completely destroyed, we can build something better. But I think that what a lot of academics who could actually utilize their position both within a larger academic collective and also at institutions that are maybe more committed to their faculty than like my institution, is that they are proving that being an academic for most people is actually about upward mobility, and it's about clout, and it's about power, and it's about rising in the institution. It's not actually about ideas. It's not actually about
Yeah.
I hesitate to
Professional
say,
achievement.
right. And, I don't really care about any of those things. Like at the end of the day, like the thing that I care most about is, will I be able to look back on my life and feel like I did what I could when I could? And honestly, at this point, I'm like, no, we can always be doing more. But I think, striving towards that, like, what on earth is
Yeah.
our life for if it's
Yeah.
not for
Totally.
that? And especially for people who see themselves as contributing to ideas and thinking in the world, like
Exactly.
that silence has undermined anything that publication or teaching may have done in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. And to turn a bit on the head, this uh, what you were talking about, class, right? I mean, academics, they have a job. They are, barely making paycheck to paycheck. I have deep sympathy. You don't want to lose that particular paycheck. But there's a level at which academics also operate within such a bourgeois upper class sphere. You've studied or whatever, yes, maybe with loans for 10 plus years. You have a job that for the most part you will get summers off and flexible hours and things like that. And sometimes it feels to me that it's about that station, that class station you end up on. It's about not wanting to let go. And I remember saying to someone, it's like, it's okay, like, you lose your job, remember when you can waitress or whatever. We've done those kinds of things. It's
Hmm.
okay. And it's like, what? It's just
Yeah.
it's just it's about the class privilege that it gives, to be part of some sort of institutional, I don't know what it is, like some sort of institutional privilege, power, all those kinds of things. There is something about not letting go as well of that class thing that rankles to me, about academia as well. It's like,
Yeah.
once I
I
fall
mean,
from that
yeah.
class, that's it, you know
I'll say like a lot of people have not worked in the service industry and it shows.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I came from a fairly privileged family in India, but I did do it just for fun. Everyone was doing it, and you know what? It's okay. It taught me a lot, and it's okay if one ends up there. I'm not saying there are so many jobs available in the service industry that academics should leave and go there either, but it's about losing a certain privilege too, that has
Yeah.
become a big issue, I think, for me. But I'm going to ask you one final question, because I feel like perhaps, and maybe I'm speaking for you, but I think you thought perhaps being Jewish might have protected your speech. Must, as a Jewish person, if you're speaking up for Palestine, carries a different weight than a dehumanized Muslim or Arab or Palestinian. All the racism flies in when it comes to that. So I feel like perhaps you didn't think things would get as bad as they did. I don't know if I'm right or wrong about that. Um, but now it turns out being Jewish does not protect you. And
Yeah.
I was just, I was wondering, because I think what was happening back in October, November of 2023, when it became clear that this is a genocide, this is a genocidal war, that this is unlike anything, despite years of ethnic cleansing, unlike anything Israel has waged upon Palestinians, and and how much American money was going into it, American weapons, American ideology. It felt like one of the type of narratives that was proliferating is what I would call the conversion narrative, which is to say, I grew up Zionist in a Zionist family, and then I learned about what was going on, and believe me, this is settler colonialism, this is bad, Zionism is bad, I'm Jewish, and that's not the same as being Zionist, right? Wanting to say that support for Israel, Zionism, and Jewish cultural religious life is different from each other. That you can be Jewish, but you can be pro Palestine, you can be pro anti Zionist. But I'm wondering, like, is this potent anymore? Have the lines somehow blurred today? And by which I mean not lines for individual people, but is it starting to feel that the more one asserts Jewishness, the more one asserts the history of the Holocaust that has been instrumentalized so much to kill Palestinians, for these massacres, for this genocide, the victimization that has been imposed on that particular narrative? Is this, is saying I'm Jewish and anti-Zionist moving the needle, or is asserting Jewishness effacing Palestinianness? I guess that's the question at the end
Yeah,
of
I
that.
think that that's a really, yeah, I think that's a really important question, and I'm really grateful and glad that you asked it. So, as like a quick background, for years, I would have done the work either way, but strategically, I would often draw on like, I am Jewish, and that would become like, now I see in retrospect that it like gave me, like I thought it was giving me legitimacy. It made me safer. It made all of these things for folks who were so enveloped by anti-Palestinian racism and Islamophobia that like they would listen to me in ways that they wouldn't listen to Palestinians. And I realized that that is what was happening in that sort of move. And I sort of continued to do it in different strategic ways for the first year of the genocide, of saying like, these are Jewish values. Jewish values aren't genocide. They're not Zionism, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't do that anymore, in large part because I've learned from Palestinians who are writing about this, who are posting on social media, conversations that I'm having, that when Jewish people who identify as anti-Zionist draw on like, I'm saying this because, Jewish values, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's actually employing the same logic as Zionism, which is about Jewish supremacy. So like,
Wow.
I
Okay.
listen to me because I'm Jewish, and because I'm Jewish, I have the moral authority to say that like Zionism is bad or Israel is bad or genocide is bad, et cetera, et cetera. And there's nothing about being Jewish that is anti-genocide. And I mean, it should be a human thing, right? A person thing. And everything about the genocide and the occupation of Palestine is a project of Jewish supremacy. And I think, I have a essay that I wrote in February, but like didn't like it's coming out soon, maybe this week or next week, about how Zionism borrows the logics of white supremacy, but is Jewish supremacy. And we have to think about it specifically as Jewish supremacy. That is what it is. And so, for me, I am Jewish, and that is the sort of material reality of who I am. But and because I'm Jewish, I think I have a moral obligation
Sure.
to be doing absolutely everything I can, which is pretty limited. I mean, I'm not going to Gaza. I'm not like putting myself on the front lines, but within the scope and bounds of what I think I'm capable of doing, I'm trying to do everything that I can to speak out against genocide and participate in organizing and mutual aid, et cetera, not because as a Jewish person I'm better positioned to do that, but because that is the sort of ground floor of basic human decency.
Yeah.
It is what we should all be doing. And there's nothing about being Jewish that either, I mean, it definitely doesn't protect us because, this is about power and this is about supremacy. And, we know that white people are also harmed by white supremacy and Jewish people are also harmed by Jewish supremacy, but nobody is as harmed by Jewish supremacy and Zionism as Palestinians. And I think,
Mhm.
for me, it's about centering that, highlighting that, learning from my Palestinian friends and people who I'm reading and thinking alongside of, who are really pushing me to think beyond the limits of my own imagination that has really been forged through being a Jewish person,
Mhm.
and to both accept the fact that it is my moral obligation because this is a genocide being perpetuated in the name of Judaism by Jewish people. And
Yeah.
also, my position as a Jewish person does not make, I mean, I have had a lot of opportunities to speak and write about this. And I think that there are a lot of people who need to be doing this work. And I also think that
Sure.
I often circulate, not here, but I often circulate in ways that Palestinians who are smarter and more knowledgeable about everything that I talk about than me are not being listened to in the same kind of way just because of
Sure.
racism and Islamophobia. So I think it's really complicated, but I've really stopped using my Jewishness
Mhm.
as any kind of moral, you know,
Yeah.
imperative that, gives me any
Yeah, like
kind
a
of,
bar. Hmm.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great, great, great answer because, yeah, I've been floundering with this, and I read Mohammed El Kurt's Perfect Victims, which is like a
Mhm.
devastating
Yeah.
read because it's totally nihilistic, but also theoretically quite brilliant. And one of the things he says is that Palestinians have been noble, and they keep making the differentiation between Jewish and Zionist, or Jewish and Israeli, but Israelis or Jewish Americans or whatever keep pushing to blur that distinction, and they Palestinians keep trying to uphold it, and they keep blurring it. And this, what are we? What to do then? What are we to take from that? So in a way, some of what you're saying, the word Jewish supremacy that you used, I haven't heard that before, is super interesting. So thank you for that. What is your plan? What are you going to do now? What's happening? What is life
Yes.
after being fired? Fired multiple
I'm,
times in your case.
I
You were
know, I had
fired,
never
then there
been.
was something else, then you were fired again, then there was another committee, and then you were fired again. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry.
No, honestly, like, I think that, I'm in good company with this. On a personal level, it sucks to get fired. We work like most of our adult life to get to this position. And also, it's a small thing to give up when every day I'm watching, Palestinians in Gaza who've had like their entire, I mean,
Mhm.
they've
Of
lost
course.
everything. And I think, I appreciate the ability to put this in perspective. Like I am fine. Obviously, I'm in this very tiny room full of books where I get to like write things. I'm fine. Uh, I am learning. I mean, I also need to figure out how to make a paycheck, because the benefit of being a college professor was not having to think about that, not making a ton of money, but not having to think about it. So I'm freelance editing. If anybody needs a developmental editor, I'm doing that.
Yeah,
Get in touch. And I'm writing, I'm trying to say yes to everything that I'm asked to do. I have an incredible group of organizers who are teaching me how to be in organizing spaces, because I think
wow.
academics often think that they can do anything and that they have the skills to do anything. And I hear a lot of academics talk about also being activists and organizers, and they're not. And so I have very generous comrades who have brought me into organizing spaces and taught me a lot. And I'm also working on a book about campus repression and Zionist
Fantastic.
organizations, mostly looking at Hillel International and the work that they've been doing.
Mhm.
I mean, I will give the Zionists this. They have been working for decades towards this moment. And, this is what the
I
success of
know.
their project looks like. I don't know if, they're
Absolutely.
proud of themselves, but this has been going on for a really long time.
Yeah, well, the book sounds fantastic, and I hope you get a
Thank you.
whopping advance for a book like that. And don't write it
We'll
for
see.
academic places.
No,
And
no, done with
if
that.
not, as you know, there's always a cafe in Brooklyn where you can waitress and not be rich at all.
Exactly.
It's okay. But thank you so much for being here today. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. It was a real honor.